The late afternoon sun spilled through the tall windows of the conference center in Savannah, Georgia. Eleanor Hayes, 41, had just wrapped up her keynote speech on architectural resilience, a topic she knew all too well. Her phone buzzed as she gathered her notes. Caller ID, Caleb, her husband of 8 years. Expecting a check-in or a proud of you message, Eleanor smiled as she stepped into the hallway and answered. Hey, everything okay? There was a pause. Then, his voice came through, cool and sharp like cracked glass. I'm divorcing you, Eleanor. I've already sold the condo. You'll need to find somewhere else to live. Her hand froze midair. For a moment, she thought it was a cruel joke. But Caleb's tone was devoid of emotion. Clinical, detached. Like he was delivering a weather update, not detonating her life. You... what? She managed. I sold the place, he repeated. You'll be fine. I've moved on. Alexis and I are buying a house in Naples. Alexis. So that was the name. The late-night texts. The trips he claimed were for team building. It all snapped into place with nauseating clarity. He hadn't just betrayed her. He had replaced her. Her breath caught in her chest, but she steadied herself. I see, she said, voice even. Well, thank you for the heads up. That was all she gave him. No begging, no screaming, just silence, and the click of the call ending. Eleanor leaned against the corridor wall, her heart thundering beneath her blazer. The man she had once trusted, once built a home with, had not only discarded her, he had done it with smug efficiency, as if she were a piece of old furniture he no longer needed. But what Caleb didn't know, what would soon unravel all his plans, was that Eleanor had quietly transferred the property deed into her name 6 months earlier, after a refinancing negotiation he hadn't bothered to read. It had seemed like a minor move at the time, but now it was her shield. As she stood in that hallway, the betrayal still raw, something inside her hardened. He thought she would collapse. He thought she was weak, but Caleb had just declared war. How many times do we underestimate quiet strength, especially in those who have spent years keeping the peace? And when the betrayal comes, who really ends up unprepared? The rest of that day moved like molasses. Eleanor sat through back-to-back meetings, her face composed, her responses automatic. Inside, she was replaying every word of Caleb's call, every smug syllable, every casual mention of Alexis, the woman who had clearly been orbiting their marriage long before this revelation. But Eleanor had something he didn't know, something that would unravel everything he thought he'd secured. The condo, the one she had chosen, designed and loved, wasn't his to sell. 6 months prior, they'd refinanced to take advantage of better interest rates. Caleb, as usual, skimmed the paperwork and signed whatever Eleanor placed in front of him. He hadn't noticed that the deed was quietly transferred into her name alone. She hadn't even done it out of suspicion, just caution. Caleb was careless with details. She had always been the one reading the fine print. Now, that caution had become her sword. Back in her hotel room that evening, Eleanor didn't cry. She didn't pace. Instead, she changed into sweats, tied her hair back, and called Chloe Archer, her attorney and oldest friend. Tell me everything, Chloe said, skipping past the pleasantries. Eleanor recounted the call, her tone even, but her pulse unsteady. He thinks he sold the condo, told me it's done and that I should figure out where I'm going to live. Chloe whistled low. Does he not realize he can't legally do that? Apparently not, Eleanor said, a flicker of amusement in her voice. He thinks he's in charge. Well, he's in for a rude awakening. If he's taken money from a buyer under false pretenses, that's real legal trouble. Fraud-level trouble. Eleanor felt a cold satisfaction settle into her spine. What do we need to do? First, we notify the buyer. Then, I'll send Caleb a formal notice stating the illegality of the sale. You own that property outright. He touched something that doesn't belong to him. As the call ended, Eleanor stared out the hotel window. The skyline shimmered beyond the glass, but her focus was clear. Caleb hadn't just betrayed her, he had underestimated her. He believed the silence she'd offered him over the years meant weakness, that her diplomacy was submission. He'd forgotten she'd built her career on structure, strategy, and foresight. The next morning, Eleanor flew back to Charlotte, her mind already composing the next steps. The buyer was shocked and cooperative, having already suspected something was off. Chloe's team moved swiftly. By the time Eleanor's plane touched down, formal documentation had been sent to Caleb's inbox. She stepped into the condo that afternoon, her keys still working. Caleb's sneakers were by the door, his cologne faint in the hallway. But the space felt different, like it had exhaled, like it knew the truth, too. That evening, the door slammed open. Caleb stormed in, phone in hand, rage radiating off him. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, waving Chloe's letter. "You're saying I can't sell the condo? It's half mine." Eleanor didn't flinch. "It's not. The deed has been in my name since April. You signed the paperwork, Caleb. You didn't read it, just like always." His face twisted. "You tricked me." "No," she replied calmly. "I protected myself. You just didn't care enough to notice." He stumbled over his next words, fists clenched. "I already made a deal. That deal is void, and if you've touched a cent from that buyer, you'd better start preparing for court." Eleanor walked past him, her voice cool. "This condo is mine. You tried to erase me. Instead, you erased yourself." She closed the office door behind her, leaving him standing in the hallway, lost, powerless, and finally realizing he'd underestimated the wrong woman. It happened on a Wednesday evening. Eleanor had just returned from her office, the condo quiet except for the hum of the AC. She poured herself a glass of Cabernet and sat at the dining table, sorting through legal documents Chloe had overnighted from her firm. Divorce papers, asset declarations, a formal letter voiding the sale, each sheet another layer of armor. Then the door creaked open. Caleb stood there, smug as ever, with a woman on his arm. She was at least 10 years younger, in a bodycon dress that clung like plastic wrap. Her blonde curls bounced with each self-assured step into Eleanor's foyer. "So this is it?" the woman said, glancing around as if assessing a hotel suite. "It's cute. I mean, smaller than I expected, but it'll do." Eleanor stood up, placing the wineglass down without a word. Her chest tightened, but her expression stayed still, controlled, detached. Caleb stepped forward. "Eleanor, this is Alexis. We'll be staying here for a few weeks until the Naples property closes." Alexis smiled as if she owned the place. "Just until we furnish the new house. You understand." Eleanor let the silence hang in the air, then spoke slowly. "No, you won't be staying here." Both Caleb and Alexis blinked. "What do you mean?" Alexis asked, her voice no longer syrupy. "This isn't your home," Eleanor replied, folding her arms. "It's mine, and I don't house trespassers." Caleb scoffed. "You're being ridiculous. I already told Alexis we could stay here." "That was before you tried to illegally sell it," she interrupted. "Before I had to explain to the buyer that the man they shook hands with doesn't even own the place." Alexis looked at Caleb, her eyes narrowing. "You said it was your apartment, that you sold it," he stammered. "Well, it's complicated." "No," Eleanor said, stepping forward. "It's quite simple. You forged the illusion of control, Caleb. You thought I'd fold, that I'd beg. But you forgot who you married. I didn't lose this place. You did." Alexis dropped his arm. "Wait, so you don't even own it? The money, the buyer? Was that all a lie?" Caleb tried to wave her off. "We'll fix it." Alexis wasn't convinced. She looked around again, now with eyes that measured liability instead of luxury. "I'm not getting involved in this disaster," she muttered, grabbing her purse. "You lied, Caleb. You said everything was handled." "Alexis, wait," he started. But she was already gone, the door slamming behind her like a closing verdict. The room pulsed with silence. Caleb stood there, his bravado evaporated. Eleanor, please. I screwed up, I know that. But you don't have to throw me out like this. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months, and all she saw was a man who had gambled everything for an illusion of freedom and lost. I'm not throwing you out, Caleb, she said. You walked out the moment you made that call. I'm just locking the door behind you. He sat on the edge of the couch, rubbing his face. We had something, didn't we? She picked up a manila folder from the counter and placed it in front of him. We had a marriage. You chose to burn it down. That's the divorce paperwork. My attorney has already filed it. He opened the folder with trembling fingers, then closed it without reading a word. You really hate me that much. I don't hate you, Eleanor said calmly. I pity you. You had everything. A wife who backed you, a home, stability. You threw it away for a fantasy, and now you're alone. He stared at her, searching for the Eleanor he remembered. The soft-spoken woman who'd always made room for his ego, who apologized just to keep the peace. But she was gone. You have until tonight to pack your things, she said, her tone final. After that, I'll have the locks changed. Caleb stood slowly. You'll regret this, he said, but the words had no power behind them. No, Eleanor replied. I regret staying silent for so long. He shuffled toward the door, defeated. No final blow-up, no last-ditch apology. Just a hollow man with a suitcase and nowhere to go. When the door shut behind him, Eleanor didn't cry. She didn't even sigh. She poured another glass of wine and walked back into the living room. The air felt clearer. The space felt brighter. And for the first time in years, she felt like the only person in her home was herself. The first night after Caleb left, the silence in the condo was almost unbearable. Eleanor lay on the couch, a blanket pulled up to her chest, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above her. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of air through the vents sounded louder. The condo didn't echo with his voice anymore, but the ghosts of his arrogance still lingered. His watch on the kitchen counter, his aftershave scent in the bathroom, the clunky gaming chair still hulking in the corner like a forgotten monument to selfishness. She rose before sunrise the next day, not out of discipline, but because her mind wouldn't rest. She made coffee the way she liked it, dark, no sugar, no judgment, and stood by the window as the Charlotte skyline bathed in pale morning light. The same city that had watched her quietly endure for years was now witnessing her rebirth. Lauren, her best friend since college, showed up at noon with moving boxes and a bottle of Pinot Grigio. Well, Lauren said, kicking off her sneakers, ready to kick his last traces to the curb. I'm more than ready, Eleanor said, tying her hair back. Let's get him out of here. They started with the small things, his neckties, gym gear, a drawer full of spare phone chargers he never used but insisted on keeping. Eleanor folded everything neatly, placing it into labeled boxes. She wasn't looking to destroy, only to cleanse. You know, Lauren said, holding up a leather belt with a skeptical expression, I never liked this one. Felt like something a man with too much ego would wear. Eleanor laughed for the first time in days. That's because it was. He thought dressing like a CEO would hide the fact that he wasn't acting like one. They boxed his framed sports memorabilia, his custom whiskey decanter, and even the coffee table he insisted on, despite how much she hated it. By evening, the living room looked empty but not hollow. It looked like a fresh canvas. You're doing better than I thought, Lauren said, wiping sweat from her brow. I'm doing better than I thought too, Eleanor admitted. But it's not just about getting rid of him, it's about making space, for me. Later that night, after Lauren had gone and the condo had settled into quiet again, Eleanor stood in the doorway of the bedroom and took a breath. She pulled Caleb's old dresser into the hallway, scraped her knuckles in the process, but didn't stop. Then she rearranged the bed, moved it closer to the window. The energy shifted instantly. It was subtle, but she felt it in her bones. Over the next few days, she transformed the condo piece by piece. She swapped out the dining room light fixture for one she'd always admired, but Caleb said was too modern. She bought a plush velvet chair for reading. She rehung her personal artwork, prints she'd taken down to make space for his sports jerseys. Now it looked like her space. Warm, elegant, lived in. Meanwhile, Chloe updated her regularly. "We're almost through," her lawyer said during a call. "No hiccups. Caleb hasn't contested anything." "I'm not surprised," Eleanor replied. "He's used to someone else doing the paperwork for him." "He signed everything without changes," Chloe confirmed. "It'll be finalized within the month." It was surreal. For years, Eleanor had felt trapped. Not by abuse, Caleb hadn't hit her, hadn't screamed, but by erosion, the slow, silent wearing down of her voice. The way he dismissed her concerns with a half smile. The way he turned their home into a place where she tiptoed emotionally. Now it was as if someone had opened the windows in her soul. The air was fresher. The weight was lifting. Still, Caleb sent messages. At first, indignant ones. "You're acting like this is all my fault." Then pitiful. "I made a mistake. Can't we talk?" Then manipulative. "You're going to ruin me. I have nothing left." Eleanor didn't reply. She didn't block him either. She wanted him to know she saw the messages and chose silence, because that silence was power. One afternoon, she sat on her newly rearranged couch with a cup of herbal tea, sunlight streaming through the windows. She gazed around the condo, at the new rug, the fresh flowers on the table, the photographs of her hiking trips and conferences. It was hers, all of it. Not just legally, but spiritually. There were still echoes, still pangs of memory, but they didn't own her. They passed like wind through open windows, present, but no longer oppressive. What used to be their shared home had become hers. Entirely, unmistakably hers. She'd spent the first weeks after his departure cleansing every corner, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. It was less about objects and more about energy, reclaiming a space that had once suffocated her with someone else's ego. Caleb had tried reaching out again. His messages varied between guilt-ridden and passive-aggressive. "You didn't have to make this so permanent." "You'll regret pushing me out." "I miss what we had." But Eleanor no longer reacted. Her silence wasn't fueled by anger. It was grounded in peace. She didn't need to respond to him. He had said everything she needed to know in that single phone call, when he laughed about her needing to figure out where to live. Now she had figured out something far greater, who she was without him. One evening, Lauren came over carrying takeout from their favorite Thai place. They sat on floor cushions, chopsticks in hand, laughing over memories from college. "You've never looked better," Lauren said, sipping from her wine glass. "It's because I finally feel like myself," Eleanor replied. "It's wild. How long I lived on autopilot, trying not to rock the boat. And now that I've jumped ship, I realize I can swim just fine." They toasted with spring rolls and traded stories until the candles burned low. That night, as Eleanor cleaned up the dishes, she caught her reflection in the glass window. There was a steadiness in her eyes she hadn't seen in years. Not hardness, not pride. Clarity. A few days later, while organizing an old drawer, she stumbled upon the envelope, the one containing the beach photo of her and Caleb from their early days. They were smiling, sunburned, arms around each other, caught in a moment that had once felt like the beginning of forever. She sat down and looked at it for a long moment. There had been love. She wouldn't deny that. But love, when left untended, can rot just like anything else. She slipped the envelope into a storage box and taped it shut. Not out of grief, but acceptance. The past belonged in the past, and she was done carrying its weight. Instead, Eleanor turned her focus to the future. She enrolled in an evening class on interior design, something she'd always wanted to explore, but had shelved for the sake of Caleb's priorities. She signed up for a weekend hiking retreat in Asheville. She began journaling again, documenting not just what she had survived, but what she was creating. One Sunday morning, she hosted brunch at her condo, just a small circle of friends, mimosas, and laughter bouncing off the walls. No one asked about Caleb. No one needed to. His absence wasn't a wound. It was a door that had closed to make space for something more authentic. After the last guest left, Eleanor stood in the middle of her living room, taking it all in. The scent of fresh flowers, the warm clink of dishes waiting in the sink, the echo of joy in the silence. She opened the window, letting the breeze flow in. There was no longer any need to move on, in the way people often say it. She wasn't moving on from the past. She was simply moving toward herself. That evening, as the city lights flickered on outside, she sat on the balcony with a book in her lap and her feet tucked beneath her. Her phone vibrated on the table next to her. Caleb. She let it ring. Then she silenced it, placed it face down, and turned another page. This wasn't the end of her story. It wasn't even the climax. It was the quiet, unshakable beginning of something entirely new, something that didn't need anyone's approval or presence to be meaningful. Eleanor was no longer waiting for permission to live fully. She had given that to herself, and this time, she wasn't giving it back. Eleanor's journey is not just about recovering from betrayal. It's a powerful reminder that we all have the ability to reclaim our lives, no matter how long we've lived in the shadows of someone else's decisions. At any age, it's never too late to make a change, to let go of the past, and to start anew. Her story teaches us that silence isn't weakness, but a space where true strength grows. It's in those quiet moments, when we stop waiting for someone else's approval, when we stop thinking we need permission, that we realize how much power we hold. For those of us who have weathered life's storms, Eleanor's path reminds us that happiness and peace aren't just things we hope for. They are choices we make every day. Her story encourages us to trust ourselves, to seek what makes us whole, and to never settle for less than we deserve. In the end, Eleanor didn't just reclaim her apartment. She reclaimed her voice, her strength, and her future. And so can we, no matter where we are in life. And as the light shifted in the room, Eleanor knew. This wasn't just recovery. This was reclamation. The morning Caleb signed the divorce papers was unusually quiet. No angry calls, no last-minute threats, no grand gestures. Just a signature delivered by courier, slid into a manila envelope with a single yellow post-it note. "Do whatever you want. I'm done." Eleanor stared at the handwriting, once familiar, now foreign. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel relief. What she felt was clarity. The papers had been months in the making. Chloe had combed through every detail, ensuring Eleanor kept the condo, the joint savings, and everything she had worked for. Caleb, facing the threat of fraud charges and public embarrassment, had caved. Quietly, completely. Lauren was the first to know. "It's done," Eleanor said over the phone. There was a pause, then a whoop so loud it made Eleanor smile. "Finally!" Lauren shouted. "You're officially free!" That night, they met at a rooftop bar downtown, Eleanor's favorite, one Caleb never liked because it was too loud, too trendy. The place was humming with live jazz and warm conversation. It didn't feel like a celebration in the traditional sense. No balloons, no announcements. Just two women raising their glasses to something sacred. A woman's right to reclaim her own story. "To freedom," Lauren said, lifting her glass of sangria. Eleanor clinked hers gently. "To never again mistaking silence for peace." They laughed, not bitterly, but with a kind of release that comes only after surviving something quietly destructive. There had been no police reports, no bruises, no slammed doors, just years of being made to feel small in the name of keeping the peace. Later, as they walked to their cars, Lauren asked the question that had been lingering beneath the evening. Do you think he really understood what he lost? Eleanor paused. Maybe, but it doesn't matter. He didn't value it when he had it. The next morning, Eleanor pulled out an old box of photos she hadn't touched in years. Buried beneath vacation snapshots and anniversary cards was a framed picture of her and Caleb from their second year of marriage. They were on the beach in Charleston, wind in their hair, barefoot in the sand. She studied it closely, her bright eyes, his hand possessively around her shoulder. There had been good moments, real ones, but they were long gone, corroded by indifference and quiet betrayal. She tucked the photo into an envelope, sealed it, and placed it in a drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but because the past didn't need to be displayed anymore. It only needed to be remembered and put away. That weekend, Eleanor found herself at a boutique home decor store, the kind she used to wander into but never bought anything from, because Caleb thought it was a waste. She bought a new rug, a pair of vintage sconces, and a record player. Back at the condo, she rearranged the living room again. The space now looked nothing like the place where their marriage had slowly unraveled. She lit candles, played a jazz vinyl, and sat on her favorite new chair, alone, not lonely. That night, Chloe called with the final update. "It's official," she said. "Everything's filed and closed. You're free." The word echoed in Eleanor's mind like a song lyric she hadn't known she needed. Free. She walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. The lights glittered like silent witnesses. No longer trapped in Caleb's shadow, she could now breathe without apology. The condo was no longer a war zone, it was a sanctuary. Of course, Caleb hadn't disappeared entirely. He still sent the occasional text, always a strange blend of guilt and nostalgia. "Do you ever miss it? I still can't believe you pulled this off." Eleanor never replied. She didn't need to, because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about truth. The truth that strength isn't always loud, that sometimes real power is the ability to walk away and mean it. As she sipped a glass of wine and curled up with a book that night, Eleanor felt something she hadn't in years. Not victory, not vindication, just peace. A month after the divorce was finalized, Eleanor Hayes stood in her living room, a mug of Earl Grey warming her hands as the early spring sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains. The air in the condo felt different now. Not just fresher, but lighter, like it had finally exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Everything about the space had changed, not through renovation, but through quiet intention. The furniture was rearranged to match her rhythm, not someone else's. Family photos and watercolor prints now hung where Caleb's framed jerseys once dominated. His oversized leather chair had been replaced with a soft, cream-colored armchair where she now did her morning reading. A few green plants dotted the windowsills, life growing where silence had once taken root.